All right, hey folks, thanks for tuning into the Land and Home Show. Today we're talking about restrictions, covenants, easements, and all that stuff. So keep watching. Hey, I'm Stephen J.B. Davis, your land specialist and residential realtor here in Kentucky, Central Kentucky. Sorry, I was waving at someone. Central Kentucky and beyond. Today we're talking about easements, restrictions, covenants, all of those things, zoning. I often come up with ideas when I'm in the shower. I think it's the white noise. And yesterday I was like, well, I'm going to have lots of car time. Oh, shoot, missed my turn. We can keep going. And I thought about this because whether people are looking to buy 10 acres or 100 acres, there's always this idea of, I don't want any restrictions. And I wanted to kind of break down what that word really means, or rather what it can mean and what you ought to do about it. So even though I have about 50 minutes, 50, before I get to my next stop, this will not take that long. So first off, I want to talk about the word restrictions. Restrictions generally mean something that stops you from doing something else. So in the most literal sense of I don't want any restrictions, or however you may phrase that, really there's no such thing, because above all there's the law. And unless you're a lawless person, there are certain things that you just won't be able to do on your land. You're not going to be able to dump nuclear waste into a stream that runs into streams that other people use. That's illegal. You can't bury bodies on your property unless you have special body disposal permits. Maybe you want to make a family cemetery or something, but you can't just go around secretly burying bodies somewhere. So from the most general macro sense, there will always be restrictions. If you zoom down just a little bit under restrictions, you're almost always going to have zoning restrictions, especially when it comes to where most of you end up wanting to buy land that call me from this platform. When you're looking for modern conveniences and proximity to those conveniences, and you're looking for internet, you're talking about not a handful of counties, but you're talking about a select group of counties here in Central Kentucky where it's going to be zoned something. Now, zoning is going to change from county to county, city to city, whether that county separates its rule of law between the city and the greater county from a land use perspective. They'll still share the same police force or something, but oftentimes you'll have a county tax code, and then you'll have like a city tax code. And that county tax code is usually ruled by what we call, I don't know if it's called the same thing everywhere, but like the fiscal court. And so zoning is often split up that way as well, where the city proper, living in the city limits, has certain zoning things, and you're going to find certain zoning to be more common, whereas you're going to find other zoning in the city limits to not really exist. Like, you're going to find a lot of commercial zoning in city limits of places, because that's where your shops are, that's where your banks are, those are all commercial uses, restaurants, things like that. And when you get outside of city limits, you may find agricultural, or you may find industrial land, or something like that. And so the categories of zoning can often be the same. Most places have industrial zones, they have residential zoning, they have sub-levels of residential. Can you put multifamily here or just single family? Is it rural residential? Most places have agricultural zoning. Very rarely do you have a place that is unzoned. That's going to be much further out, places that have lots of unincorporated communities. They don't really have a mayor, they have a city name, but it's not truly a city kind of situation. And unzoned is going to be about the closest that you get to having to follow the law, city laws, state laws, federal laws, but not necessarily having any sort of dictation on what you can build, how you can build it, and things like that. But again, by and large, you're probably going to run into a situation, if you're looking around here, where it's going to be zoned something. And what's going to be permitted versus what's going to be conditional versus what's going to be prohibited is always going to come into play. So permitted is like green light, Conditional is like yellow light, meaning you've got to ask permission, may or may not get approved for that use or for that type of building. Prohibited means this is the zone, you cannot put things like that here. You cannot make things like that on this type of property. You cannot dispose of things like that on this type of property. So you got your permitted, your conditional, and your prohibited uses when you're starting to talk about zoning. Those are types of restrictions, right? So you're going to be restricted most likely on some level, okay? No restrictions is not really a thing. Unzoning is about as close as you can get to that idea, but you're not going to find a whole lot of unzoned property around here. Then you get down into restrictions. Restrictions are things that an individual, it's short of an easement, so it's not quite an easement. I've got to turn around here. I missed my turn, and all Google was telling me to do was find a place to turn around. Little did I know. I'm driving from looking at a listing that I hope to get. Anyway, so when you talk about restrictions, it's something that an individual does to say, you know, I want to protect the integrity of this property because I used to own it, or because it was designed to have homes on it and not I don't know, chicken fighting coops and things like that. So like when it comes to those, it's not one size fits all. And in fact, you can actually throw a lot of easement stuff into this conversation, but we'll save easements for later because of a few different reasons. So when you're talking about restrictions though, a restriction is not, or a restrictive document or having restrictions on a property does not always mean that there are the same types of restrictions across the board. In fact, I was looking at a property for some new clients of mine, and there are restrictions on one of the properties, but the restrictions pretty much amount to, you know, if you're going to have a mobile home on the property, you need a skirting around it. You can't subdivide the property past a certain amount of acres and have more than one home on that acreage, meaning, you know, you're not going to make a bunch of high density housing on 10 acres. You may be able to separate it into 5, but there's going to be one home on 5 and one home on the other. And you may say, oh, well, that's a kind of restriction that I don't want. Okay, well, that's fine, but you have to realize that not all restrictions are necessarily stated that way. Not all restrictions have acreage restrictions. Not all restrictions involve hunting. Not all restrictions involve what you can or can't build. Restrictions are not one size fits all. So you need to make sure, first of all, that you define what kind of restrictions you are averse to, meaning what is it that you want to be able to do, and are there any restrictions that would prevent you from doing that? Because some of them may benefit you. They may protect your resale value. They may make it such that if you're in one of these rural developments where there's like 10, 30 acre parcels and there are restrictions around dividing that, and you have an HOA, for lack of better description, even though everyone's 30 acres apart or more, when you go to sell, for instance, it's gonna make it better that there can't be 30 houses at first and then 10 years from now 150 houses. That destroys the integrity of that development. And sometimes it's not even about development. Sometimes it's emotional stuff. Some of you have sold homes before and you ask questions like, you know, who's going to buy it or what are they going to do with the house? Some people have very deeply emotional attachments to what's this property going to look like in 50 years, even though I won't be here in 50 years or I won't own it in 50 years. So restrictions come in all shapes and sizes, and it's really up to you to figure out what are you realistically going to do, and do those restrictions prevent you from doing that? Or do they in fact help you? So I guess at the end of the day, keep an open mind when you see restrictions or covenants around acreage. Now, if you're talking about a straight up subdivision and there are restrictions, you're talking about HOAs, you're talking about where you park your car and if you can have a 1-ton truck somewhere and things like that. Those are generally different in nature. They don't typically, you don't see that out in rural areas. You can drive whatever you want, park it however you want, that kind of thing. But there are restrictions from time to time of a different nature, and so just understand what it is you want to do, and if you see restrictions, really ask yourself and be honest, you know, what am I realistically going to do while I own this property, and do these restrictions prevent me from doing any of that? The last thing is easements. Easements are often given a bad rap because of the same reason that restrictions are. They are a type of restriction, just like restrictions or covenants sometimes are used, interchangeably, but easements kind of work the same way. And little known fact, or maybe it's widely known, but I know very few people as nerdy as I am. There are 17 different types of easements. All easements are not created equal. All easements do not hurt the person who holds it. All easements do not act the same way. There are some easements that are to your benefit. For instance, if you are in a landlocked property and you have to get to it legally, you have a right to get to it. So whether or not somebody fights in court for a year, or you have a reasonable neighbor that understands that the law is not on their side, you have to be able to legally access your property. And so the way to do that is through an access easement or an ingress-egress easement. And as the person who's landlocked, you're benefited, right? You have the ability to get to your property. The person that is burdened in an easement like that is the person that may perceive themselves as being disadvantaged. I mean, it really depends on how you look at it, but legally speaking, there's a burdened party and then there's a party who's given an advantage. And in that situation, you would certainly be, as the landowner who's landlocked, you'd be the one who's benefited. You'd be the benefited party. There are conservation easements. Those are not one size fits all. Conservation easements can pertain to all sorts of things. They can pertain to conserving the right to develop. So some people sell their rights to develop more homes on a large piece of property, and someone will buy that right so that no one can ever develop on the property. Sometimes it's subsurface rights. It's, hey, you can do whatever you want, but we have bought, a land trust has bought the right to extract and exploit the minerals beneath the surface. In Alabama and Georgia, that often looks like granite. There's a lot of granite down there. In Kentucky, that can look like coal or even oil and natural gas. Sometimes easements are just about historic value. There's a historic easement, conservation easement on a house, where if you're ever going to modify that house, the materials that you use need to be like the ones that were originally used. You can't go making a home from 1850 look like a home that could be in the year 2050. So conservation easements are just like some of those covenants and restrictions that I talked about, except for a lot of times they speak more broadly to how the land is treated, how the land is exploited, or how productive the land is. It can speak to structures on the land and how those are preserved and things like that. And again, depending on who you are, that could be to your benefit. To know that, this historic building will always be historic and will always be there. That it would otherwise be a very big legal issue if someone decided to tear it down or move it or modify it in such a way that it became, overly modern according to whatever the terms of that easement are. So I wanted to bring that all to your attention because they're often seen as dirty words. When you hear zoning, when you hear restriction or covenant, when you hear easement, and everyone thinks, that's not going to work. The devil's in the details. It's just like writing an offer. If I say I'm going to give you $5 million for your property, but you're not going to get it for 10 years, and someone else offers you $2 million and can give it to you tomorrow, which one do you think you're going to take? It's the details, right? It's not just the price tag. It's the fact that one, you got to wait a really long time, and the other one, well, you get it now. Easements, restrictions, covenants, and zoning work the same way. It all depends on what the circumstance is. What are the details of getting past the word easement, covenant, or restriction? So with that, I am going to go. I've got some really cool plans. I know I keep saying that, but it's because, let me make sure I can turn. It's because coordinating with other people's schedules is very, very, very difficult. And I just haven't had a good matchup. We've got some hunting panels about public land coming up. We got some things about a lot of things. So just stay tuned. Get in touch with me if you have questions, if you have things that you need to buy or sell, especially if they're land. If they're a home too, I can certainly help you out. Whether you're far away, I can find you somebody, or if you're nearby, I can probably work it out. So here to help, here to sell, here to buy, and I am going to get on to my next little appointment here. I will talk to y'all later. Adios.